All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Chamber Southwest and the Southwest Louisiana Economic Development Alliance webinar with Dr. Loren Scott. Today's webinar on our state and regional economy is presented by Iberia Bank. And we ask that if you have any questions during the program for Dr. Scott, we will submit those to him afterwards by using the chat feature at the bottom of your taskbar. So just send your questions in and I will relay them to Dr. Scott. And before I introduce Phil Earhart, I want to thank Iberia Bank not only for sponsoring this, but for their generous gift of $500,000 to local food banks throughout their service area. Thank you, Iberia Bank, for this great gesture, and we really appreciate you doing this. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the Southwest Louisiana Market President for Iberia Bank, Phil Earhart. Good morning, Phil.
Good morning. Welcome to this special talk on the future of Louisiana's economy in light of the COVID pandemic. Last week, George and I heard Dr. Scott give a presentation on the topic and thought that Southwest Louisiana would like to hear the talk. And again, Iberia Bank is very pleased to sponsor Dr. Loren Scott this morning. Loren C. Scott & Associates is a 35-year-old firm that provides economic consulting and public speaking services for a wide range of clients. Consulting activities include impact studies, forecasting services, analyses of policy proposals, and general economic analyses. Consulting clients include BP, ExxonMobil, Entergy, JP Morgan Chase, Capital One Financial, Nucor, Sasol, and a diversity of others. He's been interviewed on MSNBC, CNBC, Bloomberg TV, and several local TV stations, and his work has been cited in such publications as the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, USA Today, the Los Angeles Times, the Moscow Times, just to name a few. Dr. Loren Scott is the president and founder of the firm. He was on the economics department faculty at Louisiana State University from 1969 to 1998, where he rose through the ranks from assistant professor to the holder of the Freeport-McMoran Endowed Chair of Economics. He is presently professor emeritus of economics at LSU. For the 13-year period from 1983 to 96, Dr. Scott was the chairman of the economics department at LSU. During that time, the department's ranking among 3,000 economic departments in the United States rose from 101st to 38th. He received 7 awards at LSU for outstanding classroom teaching. Dr. Scott is a co-developer of the Louisiana Econometric Model, a model used for providing annual forecasts of the Louisiana economy, which were released each fall. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Loren Scott. Thanks.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Phil. It's great being with the folks from Southwest Louisiana again. Just a bummer that I don't get to see you all in person. That is the shelter in place stuff is no fun, and one of the negatives of it is I don't get to be around the people that I get to see every year in Lake Charles and get to say hello to you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up some slides to show with you, as is my wont, and we'll get it started here. Hopefully that's showing up on your screen. What I want to do is to take you back to January. And there's an important reason for this, and that is first to keep in the back of our heads the understanding that the economy was actually in very good shape before the coronavirus hit. You see some forecasts here. This is the one I usually share when I come over with the group, talk to you. One is from the Wells Fargo Economics Department, and the other is the Consensus Forecast USA, a forecast that is based on about 45 different forecasting firms in the country. It's an average of that particular group. And as you kind of see, looking out to 2020, all the way through 2020, 2021, real gross domestic product was thought to be in good shape. We were going to keep on growing. We had already been setting in January record levels of boom period growth. I think we were in about 128th month of growth at that time period. And basically what everyone was saying is that the economy is going to keep right on growing unless there is some sort of what economists refer to as an exogenous shock coming from the outside. Well, hello, we got exogenous shock. We actually got 2 of them, as it turns out, one the coronavirus, and one what happened to the oil sector. When you look at the state as a whole, again, the information I shared with you folks back in September when I was over in Lake Charles, you can see here a picture of what was happening to employment in Louisiana. Louisiana, if you look here at 2018 and 2019, had been in kind of a lull. We had not been growing very much. And the reason for that, as you'll see in the next chart I'll show you in a second, is that the construction sector, after having just a great period 2 or 3 years before this, had finished up a very large number of projects in the state. The other big set of projects that was coming along, billions of dollars in projects, had not quite been started. As we would say, they had not issued a final investment decision, FID. But what we believed at the time when we made our forecast last September was, guess what? They are about to start those projects up in the second half of 2020 and 2021. As you can see here, we thought there would be very good growth in the state in those 2 years. You can see here about a little over 50,000 new jobs coming along. And if you see this is a picture of construction employment up through 2019. And you can see here in the green area, the big increase in construction employment in the state associated with all those big projects, many of them in the Lake Charles area, things like the Cheniere, the Sempra facility, the Sasol facility, and several others that were underway during that time period. Lake Charles was the big beneficiary of that. And then we finished those projects. The next round of projects had not started up yet. So we went into this lull. And as a result of that lull, as you can see here, construction employment in 2019, after growing at record rates earlier, the last 4, 5, 6, 7 years suddenly went into a decline, a loss of about 6,600 jobs. Now, when you look at Lake Charles, this is what we showed you last September. This is what our expectations were, that after really great growth during this period that you see right here, as a matter of fact, you were one of the fastest growing metropolitan areas in the United States between about 2013 and 2018. Very, very sharp growth here. Then you had the lull in 2019, and we had you all posed to be the fastest growing area in the state as these new projects came online. Well, the exogenous shocks occurred. We have had the shelter at home order since mid-March. And this has been a crunch on not only the national economy, but Louisiana as well. I made some earlier estimates back in early March about mid-March, about how many jobs I thought we would lose in Louisiana in the month of March. Remember that the shelter at home was only in place for half of the month. And my estimate was we would lose about 266,000 people who were basically hourly employees who did not have a check coming in. They're not like folks like, say, state workers who are still working, but they're working from home. We're not talking about those. We were talking about people who had actually lost their jobs. Now, I revised those a little more recently because I had not taken into account the losses in the healthcare sector. I thought the healthcare sector would actually grow. It actually has been one of the sectors that actually experienced quite a bit of decline because doctors' offices, clinics, and things like that, elective surgeries, all those have been delayed. And so there's been a lot of problems in the healthcare sector. Now, we have, if my numbers turn out to be correct, they suggest that when we get the unemployment rate numbers in the latter part of this month, get the unemployment rate numbers for March, I think they will indicate that the unemployment rate in Louisiana is around 22%, because you have the 349 people losing their jobs in addition to the 110 that were already unemployed back in February. So we have not seen numbers like this probably since the Great Depression. This is a really, really big number. And I'm talking about the Great Depression, not the Great Recession. Now, we actually have some leading indicators of how close I was to these numbers. And that is the unemployment insurance claims numbers. Now, remember that the shelter in place took place in the middle part of March. So in the week that ended March 21st, we suddenly jumped from what would be typically about 1,500 applications to 72,000, something we haven't seen really since Katrina and Rita. And then, as you can see, as we went into the next week, the week of April the 3rd, 102,000 people. If you sum up all these, it sums up to 444,000 people almost, about a fourth of our labor force that is out of work. So that is, again, these are numbers like we have never seen before. My estimate for Lake Charles metropolitan area, now this is just the 2-parish area. I know George's outfit services about 5 parishes. This is just the Census Department calls the Lake Charles MSA, and that is Calcasieu and Cameron parishes. And my estimate is that this area, well, in the month of March, lost almost 27,000 jobs, about a fourth of the workforce. And we, again, have a leading indicator of that, and that is if you look at the unemployment insurance claims for the last 5 weeks, the comparable ones for these numbers here for the Calcasieu and Lake Charles and Cameron Parish area, it adds up to 21,426. So it's not that far off from what I've estimated. You already had about 4,300 people employed. So the implied unemployment rate for your area is about 29%. That's, again, numbers like we've never seen before. But I want to emphasize again, what is going on now is not because of something fundamentally wrong in the economy. What is the underlying basis of the economy, I think, is generally very good. But what is going on is just this weird thing called the coronavirus and the shelter-in-place orders that we're under right now. So under normal circumstances in the past, a 29% unemployment rate would just send us into great, great, great fear. Not so much now, because I think most of us believe this is temporary. When the shelter-in-place is removed, then things will improve dramatically. Now, there's a second exogenous shock that is hit that's important to Louisiana. And as it turns out, it's important to your area as well. And that's the hit that the oil market has experienced. And the oil market has experienced 2 hits. One has been a dramatic decline in demand for oil as a result of the coronavirus. What you see here for the first, second, and third quarter are estimates made by IHS, a very famous forecasting firm here in the country. It used to be Moody's, I guess. And as you can see, they were forecasting, and this is about a month old, about a drop of about 26 million barrels per day. Typical, the world demand for oil, this is the world demand, is about 100 million barrels per day. So this is a decline of about a fourth. Now, since then, and by the way, you can see in the first quarter of 2021, they're expecting this to pop back up again. But the IEA, the International Energy Administration, is now saying this number is closer to 29 million barrels a day. So about a third of the oil demand is suddenly dropped, something we've never seen really in history before. As a matter of fact, I looked up the number for 2009 during the Great Recession. The total drop was a tenth of that, about 2.9 million barrels of oil per day. So it was just a huge, huge decline. Of course, the primary reason for that is because I know the data from your airport, the data from everybody's airport indicate that nobody's flying. Nobody's driving on the road for the most part. That part is dramatically dropped. About 60% of oil consumption in the world is for transportation, and that part has just been creamed. So if you take these numbers here, there has been a big decrease in the demand for oil, and that is one of the things that caused the oil price to decline. And by the way, this is important to your area. There are about 3 refineries in your area, and we're seeing the evidence. These are the data for weekly U.S. refinery net inputs of oil that is bought by the refinery industry. And you can see here in gray, you have the 10-year range. The 5-year range is higher here in the dark area. And then here in the blue line here, you'll notice this is 2019. And then 2020 comes along. And look, boom, you get to April. It was going along just fine until boom, you get to April, coronavirus, the shelter in place, no traveling, and suddenly you have about a 46% decline in gasoline demand, estimated worldwide, or excuse me, in the United States in April, on the week of April the 11th. So we've had a big drop in the amount of oil coming in refineries. Now, right now, refineries are operating at about 69% of capacity. And one of the things that happens in the refineries is they're having to figure out what the heck do we do here? Some of the smaller refineries, when their capacity gets down to about 60%, they find it only makes sense to totally shut down. I don't think that's going to happen for the refineries in your area. We have had that happen to one of the refineries in the Northeast, a real small one. But this is a very problematic thing for the refinery industry. And I'm going to come back and talk about the refinery and the chemical side and a little bit later on. Now, the second hit that came to the oil market occurred on March the 5th. And on March the 5th, the group we call OPEC Plus, that would be the Saudis plus the Russians, who had been helping out the oil market by taking oil off the market, keeping the oil priced up. They had their meeting to not only continue those cuts, but have even more cuts. But the Russians said, no, we don't want to do this. So the Saudis, and what to me was one of probably the dumbest moves that ever come out of that country, said, well, we'll show you, we're going to not only not cut, we're going to add 2.5 million barrels of oil on the market. At the same time, we have this big decrease in demand. So what do you have here? You have a big decrease in demand. You have a big increase in supply. Then we see the hit to oil prices. Today, the price of oil has dropped from about $60 a barrel in January down to today, I think it's around $16 to $17 a barrel. Now, there is some good news out there, and that is these countries got together April 9th and April 10th. There was two important meetings that took place. On April the 9th, there was a meeting of OPEC Plus again. And the good news is in that meeting, they agreed to reduce oil production by about 12.5 million barrels of oil per day. Now, you may have seen in the paper 9.7, and that 9.7 does not include the 2.5 that the Saudis suddenly pumped on the market after March the 5th. And then the next day, on the 10th, the G20 countries got together, and their countries like Brazil, the United States, Canada, Mexico, Norway said, okay, we will also see to it that we take another 4 to 5 million barrels of oil per day. And then when you add in the others, oil producers that are not members of the G20, it looks like around 20 million barrels of oil per day would be taken off of the market. Now, remember, right now, we think demand has been reduced by 29. So the industry is still out of whack. But what made things even worse was that this agreement that they made in April was not to be implemented until May the 1st. Well, this, again, was just a remarkably, to me, dumb decision if you're an industry country that relies heavily on oil and gas, because in the meantime, all this oil is continuing to be produced by OPEC Plus, the United States, and others, and it's got no place to go. And so what we have is this huge buildup in stocks of oil right now. I mean, one of the neat things for you to own right now is an oil storage tank or an oil salt dome, because right now the primary reason we had that big decline in oil prices, last Monday, where the price actually went negative by $36 or $37 a barrel. The primary reason for that is that they were having trouble figuring out where to put the oil if they bought it. And so right now you have about 24 very large crude carriers on the ocean right now, just from Saudi Arabia, that has really no place to go. It's just being stored on those very large crude carriers. All of your tank farms are getting very close to filled, especially those in Cushing. I think I have some data to show you that in just a minute. But they're storing it in pipelines. They're buying these little tanks that you can put beside your well to put it in. There is just a really big problem out there. This is a picture of from the EIA, I think it is. The Energy Administration, Information Administration, showing this is this dash line is about how much we can store in the United States, not including the SPR, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And you'll notice here that we were kind of starting out at the first of the year being in the range, but look what is starting to happen to this line. And it is already moved up to right in this area, right in here, about 518. And so it is still going up and going up and going up. And it's starting to head towards this, this ultimate place where you can't store anymore. And, so we just got a problem. Now, one of the consequences of this big buildup in stocks is that once the shelter and home order is lifted, once the economy starts to return to normal, remember again, its underlying basis is very good. Once it starts to return to normal and you get that demand coming back for more and more oil, the price of oil is not going to be able to go up for a while. It's not going to be able to go up until we've worked off all of these excess supplies that we've built up in stocks. So that's a very important thing to keep in mind when we think about how quickly Louisiana will recover. Now, speaking of recovery, let's look. This is one I've been teaching. I taught forecasting for 30 years at LSU to MBAs and executive MBAs. And this is this is the most difficult time period for forecasting that I've ever seen. And that is because there is so much uncertainty out there about what's going to happen. So I thought I would share with you remember I started out my presentation by showing you January 20th. Let's look at the April 20th forecast by Wells Fargo and the 45 companies and forecasting firms in Consensus USA. Well, first of all, you see that we had a negative number in the first quarter. We don't know these numbers yet, but they will be negative for sure. And then we have the second quarter numbers. Now, again, you will see people say, we've never seen this before, over and over and over again. We have never seen anything like this before. They've been collecting quarterly data on real gross domestic product for 73 years. The worst quarter ever before this one was minus about 10%. I think that occurred back in the late 1950s. This is, what, 2.5 times worse than that, than the worst quarter ever in the country's history. So these are just numbers like we have never seen before. So this is going to be bad when this quarter comes out. What is on the back of everybody's mind, I know right now, is what's the recovery going to be like? And as you can see, I think one of the things we're most worried about is this going to be a W? Are we going to take care of this problem with our shelter and home? We all go back to work, and then boom, again in the fall, we get another round of coronavirus, and we go back into the hole again. We have to shelter in place again. We go back to the hole again. Well, if you look at first of all, you'll notice very close agreement about the second quarter of 2020 between these two groups. When it comes to coming out of it, the consensus, the average of about 45 different forecasting firms, is much better than Wells Fargo. I mean, they really think this is going to be not quite a V coming out, but pretty darn close to it. But by the time we get to through the first quarter of 2021, we'll have recovered most of what we lost back here. So they see a good, neat, very strong recovery. By the way, just again, a way of reference, look at this 10.7 number here for the third quarter for the consensus. Look at what it was back in 2019. It's more numbers like 2. So again, this is 5 times better than what we were growing back here. So these are very good growth rates, and there's a lot of pent-up spending, especially on durable goods like cars and furniture and things like that, that is not taking place here, that's going to take place here. There's a lot of pent-up spending on services too. Like, I don't know about you, but I'm ready to get a haircut. There's gonna be haircuts, beauty parlors, all kind, restaurant meal, going back out to restaurants again. So you'll see there's a lot of pent-up demand that's being lost here, that's going to be spent here. Wells Fargo is not quite as optimistic as that. It's a little bit more of a U, kindergarten U, if you like, but a pretty sharp V here for consensus. Now, I've mentioned that this is one of the most difficult forecasts to make right now because of the level of uncertainty. And to show you the level of uncertainty, again, there are about 45 different firms that they average together to get this. If you average the annual growth rate in 2020 and say, what did the most pessimistic person say? What did the most optimistic person say among the 45? Usually in the past, the difference is about 1 percentage point. The most pessimistic will say 3%. The most optimistic will say 4. Look at the bottom line here. Look at that. The most optimistic says minus 1.3%. The most, excuse me, the most pessimistic says minus 8.5. There's 7 percentage points difference. That's just an indication of how different folks think this is going to turn out. Some people are very optimistic, some people very pessimistic. A lot of uncertainty there. Now, when it comes to the Louisiana recovery, how will we do relative to the United States? Well, we'll be helped by the U.S. recovery. We're always helped when we come out of a recession by the U.S. economy booming. We have a tendency to come out as well. Our problem is that we have got low oil prices. The problem that I mentioned earlier, where you have that big buildup of storage, all that oil we have to work off before the price of oil can start to go up again. And so the first thing that's going to happen is the oil patch that's going to be a problem for the oil patch, especially the area of Houma and Lafayette. That's going to be a very big problem for them. And that's really unfortunate because poor Houma has not had a really good growth year. In fact, they've had mainly decline years since about 2015. They've had a very, very tough go of it. The Gulf of Mexico, I think, was all set for a recovery. There was all kinds of signals the Gulf of Mexico was getting ready to come back a bit. And now, boom, this happened. So this is going to be tough on the oil patch. The second problem is really something that's a problem for the Lake Charles area. And that is, when I had my discussion with you folks back in September, there were 4 LNG export projects that I thought were going to happen. They were going to pull the trigger, have a final investment decision this year, and we would have about $40 billion worth of projects that would start up, and that old construction lull would be over, especially be over in the Lake Charles area, because 3 of these are in the Lake Charles area. These 3 in red: the Driftwood, the Lake Charles LNG, and the Magnolia LNG. So things are looking very good, and that's one of the reasons, one of the charts I showed you earlier, that I thought the Lake Charles area would have a really good 2020 and 21. Well, the problem for these folks, one of the problems for these folks, is that when they go out in the market to sell this the LNG, they're pricing their product off the price of natural gas at the Henry Hub, which is really, really low compared to the price of natural gas elsewhere. And they were facing competition from LNG exporters from the Middle East, from Australia, etc., that price their natural gas off the price of oil. They'll take about 15% of the price of oil, and that's what they will charge for their LNG, which is about $15 a barrel back when the price of oil was 100. Well, the price of oil is now under 20, or let's just say it's 20. Well, 15% of 20 compared to 15% of 100. Our competitive advantage out there in terms of getting long-term contracts, the sort of things you need to get these projects started, our competitive advantage has basically disappeared. So that's a real problem. So you can't, it makes it way more difficult to get, contracts to buy your LNG once you build it. And if you have trouble getting contracts to buy your product, you're going to have trouble going to the market, the capital market, and raising billions of dollars necessary to build your facility. And so we have Magnolia LNG is really in trouble right now, as I appreciate it. There was somebody that was about prepared to buy them out and keep them viable, but that purchase fell through recently. My understanding is Magnolia has gotten a PPP loan to stay in business, I think, through maybe May or June, but then it just really, we don't know. In the case of the Lake Charles LNG, I'm sure you folks in Lake Charles are aware that that was a project that was going to be taking place in a partnership between Shell and Energy Transfer Partners. And recently Shell, because of the financial issues associated with low oil prices, have said, we're going to back out of this. It's going to be up to you to put this project together. And then Driftwood LNG is again, in this particular market, having trouble selling, finding contracts. We thought that they had one, I think it was with India, firm in India, and that did not go through. So all three of these, and including the Venture Global Plaquemine, which is down below New Orleans, all four of these, I think, are in jeopardy. And at least it's certainly not going to, you're not going to see the trigger pulled on them in 2020 as we had hoped. So the lull is going to be extended, and that's going to be problematic for Lake Charles. Now, the good news for Lake Charles is that it is the home to at least 16 chemical plants. This number is probably bigger now, 3 refineries, and 2 LNG export facilities already. Now, the good news about all 3 of these is, number one, they are 24/7, 365 days a year operation. They are continually operating. They operate 24 hours a day, 365 days a week. And importantly, they are the highest wage industries in manufacturing. And they are still operating. The people, for example, at Sasol, who wear a Sasol shirt, who work for the Sasol company, those folks are still working. I mean, they're still employed. That's very, very good for your area. You have this to kind of save you, as compared to the casino industry, which was very big in your area, about 1,200 jobs in the casino industry there, where the casinos are totally shut down. That's not the case for this very high wage industry here. That's very good for you. And when you look at what's going on in the chemical sector, this is U.S. chemical capacity utilization. This is a picture of what it's been like since 1989. And you'll notice that it has dropped from about 80% down to 77.5, which is not a happy drop, but it's nothing compared to what we experienced back in the Great Recession, or even back in the mild recession we had in 01. So you remember, this area produces the products, these products or products that go into making them. They produce sanitizers, soaps, cleaners, chlorine, alkalis, and pharmaceuticals, all of which are very much in demand right now. So when you look at that, when you look at the rail car loadings, these are the numbers for the week of April the 11th. The change from week to week and the change from year to year, you see numbers that are down, but these are not down 25%. They're not down 100% like it is for the casinos, for example. They're down, but they're not down real badly. And then when you look at the specialty chemical market volume here, kind of look at this teal area here, you'll notice that, it was down in March 4.4%, which is not good, but it's not 25%, and it's not 100%. So the chemical sector is getting hit, not nearly as bad as during the Great Recession by any stretch of the imagination, but it's still getting hit, but not very hard. Now, what we need to watch out for with these firms is, remember I said that the guy that has the Sasol shirt on, Sasol is still going to be working. But we need to remember that for most of these chemical firms, anywhere from 30 to 50% of the people who work at those facilities are contractors. They don't wear a Sasol shirt. They wear a shirt that has Performance Contractors, Turner Industries, Cajun Contractors, ISC, or something like that. And one of the things that's happened is, in order to help deal with the problem of their loss in sales, no matter how small it is that they have started to lay off contractors and tell them, we're going to delay maintenance, repair activity here as long as we can and still stay safe. If you look at the Baton Rouge, New Orleans region, a survey of the chemical firms and refineries along that area say that 53% said that they were reducing their contract employment. I know, for example, the Exxon refinery at here in Baton Rouge let about 1,800 people go home. Now, again, this 53% doesn't mean 53% of the contractors. It's 53% of the people surveyed said that they were reducing the contractor workforce. Well, they won't be able to do that for a very long time. They're going to have to come back and do their maintenance and repair work, but they may, in the meantime, in the early period, short run, let them go. Now, what they are doing is they are cutting, in some cases, totally stopping their construction activities. I don't think this is happening in the Lake Charles area. I know that in my area, the Baton Rouge area, Methanex, who is building a $1.4 billion methanol plant in down around Gonzales, has totally stopped the construction of that plant. And my understanding is that the Bayer people, the Bayer/Monsanto plant down there in New Orleans, has stopped its construction totally, because actually they had a contractor employee that died because of the COVID-19 project. So this is an area, the chemical industry, refinery industry, the LNG sector, export sector is providing solid employment, high wage sector, and that's very, very good for the Lake Charles area. Now, I thought I might show you just one thing here about retail trade. And these are some data from Chase. George actually has access to some great data specific to Lake Charles that basically says almost the same thing that this says. And this shows you credit and debit card sales volumes year over year. And you look at this kind of teal-shaped line. This is the big box stores. These are the Sam's Club and the Targets and the Costco's and things like that. And you see this, and this also includes grocery stores. And so we have this big spike here that occurred, especially in the latter part of March, associated with all the hoarding that we did, buying toilet paper, et cetera. And then the hoarding, however, only lasted for a while, and it has dropped off now. Sales at grocery stores are still holding up. They're still doing very well. This is the zero line. Retail sales in general is not doing well. You know, a number of your stores in your malls, many of your retail stores are closed. And as you can see here, according to the Chase data, these sales are down somewhere around 20%. When you look at restaurants, despite the takeout thing, restaurants are down somewhere in the neighborhood of 65% compared to where they were. And then the travel and entertainment, again, I refer to what is happening at all the airports, including yours. And then the casinos are part of this. Your movie theaters are part of this. Boom, I mean, it has gone down 100% loss there. So this gives you an idea. Of course, this is problematic for your local government budget. Certainly it's problematic for your state government budget, because the state government, when it comes to sales taxes, does not tax this, does not tax grocery sale or pharmaceutical sales for that matter. They mainly tax this stuff here and this stuff here. These things that are very much declining for their sales tax revenues at the state level. So the state is getting ready to go into a period of really, really tough budgetary issues. So George, that's pretty much it. How do I come back to you again? Can stop share. And I think we'll be back online again and be able to take some questions for you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Scott. If you would not share your screen anymore, if you'll close that out, I think we'll be back.
Okay, I did share it. I did close it out.
There we go. Okay, if you have any questions for Dr. Scott, you can use the chat feature. But would you comment on the impact of the oil situation on the state budget? You know, the legislature has got to go back in session and do a budget. What do you see happening this year for the state?
Yeah, when you look at what is happening to the state budget, there's 2 or 3 things for sure you can look at. Number one is just mineral revenues. The state collects, I want to say, $30 million a month on average during normal times. And that's when the price of oil was hopefully going to be around $59 a barrel. Well, of course, it is now, let's say it's 20. The state loses about $12 million a year for every dollar lost of oil prices. Well, we lost about $40 a barrel. So we've lost a lot of money there. Now, we have March, we have April, May, and June. My rough estimate is the state is going to lose somewhere in the neighborhood of $150 million in severance tax revenues because of the lower oil prices. Hopefully the prices will come up a little bit over 20 as we get into the May and June months, but right now we're talking about a loss there just about 150 million. Then, of course, remember the casinos are shut down. This is a major source of revenues for the state. The state gets about $20 million a year off of its casinos. Well, if the casinos are totally shut for 3.5 months, all the way through June, again, we're talking about $70 million there. Then the sales tax collection is one that we haven't really done some real tight work on yet. But importantly, it's important to remember that from the sales tax collection standpoint, the state's not benefiting from the hoarding. That because we don't tax groceries and pharmaceuticals. We don't get to tax those items. Local governments do, we don't. So I've roughly estimated that the state will lose another maybe 200 million between now and the end of June from that sector. So you add all that up, we're talking about somewhere in the neighborhood of $400 million loss to the state budget just from those things. Not counting income taxes, gasoline taxes, just those 3 things. Well, the good news is before we got into the shelter in place, the state was doing pretty well. It was running about a $200 million budget surplus. If we lose 400 million, that is a net loss by the end of the year of around $200 million. These are very rough figures. That is a very manageable number. But going into next year, you're going to start out with this leftover deficit that the governor, the legislature, are going to have to deal with. Then if the price of oil stays down, and next year's budget is going to have to be much lower than this year's budget was based on. So the legislature and the governor really have a problem. And the longer this dadgum oil price stays down, the longer it takes us to work off that surplus we built up in our tanks, the more difficult it's going to be going into next year. And of course, as most of your listeners know, when you cut the budget, there's only 2 places you can cut. You can cut higher ed or you can cut healthcare. And that's, our good buddy Daryl Burkett at McNeese is already struggling with a difficult budget. He's likely to be struggling with an even more difficult budget as we go into next year.
We've had a couple of questions about LNG, as you would imagine. What is your outlook? Are you bullish on the future of LNG throughout the 20s? And then what's your thoughts on the 3 LNG projects that you announced, if you think they will come to fruition?
I'm relatively bullish going out into the 20s. I'm glad you said the 20s with an S on it. I'm relatively bullish about that because if you look at, first of all, there is an ocean of natural gas available in the United States. We have lots of natural gas, and because of that, the price of natural gas is very low. And that makes us once the price of oil goes up again, we're going to be very competitive out there trying to get long-term LNG contracts. Secondly, if you kind of look at the demand for LNG and the supply of LNG coming on, we're in a little bit of a period here, a couple of year period, in which we have an excess supply of LNG. But when you get more into the 20s and really into the like 2022, 2023, suddenly the demand starts to exceed supply. And that's when we would hope these new projects would come on board, like Driftwood and Lake Charles LNG and Magnolia, to start filling in that gap. So generally speaking, I'm pretty positive about the LNG. The question is, can you keep going until we get past this time period, this very difficult time period for them? It looks to me like Magnolia is in a little bit of a difficult situation here. They were already bumping up against some financial issues. I'm worried about them. In the case of Lake Charles LNG, I would be more positive about them, and Driftwood too. I would be relatively positive. But those are the really big ones, as it turns out, and so I think that would be very good possibilities of them. I wouldn't put, I don't know what probabilities to put on it, but I think of the 3, those 2, and then if you're watching the LNG market in general, I would think the Venture Global project in Plaquemine would also be another one that I think would happen. But I'm really worried about Magnolia and whether they continue to operate past their PPP loan period.
You mentioned the casinos. What do you think the outlook is for when they would reopen, and how will the Houston economy, how is it doing, and how will that help us get back to business in our casino and gaming market here?
Yeah, well, the Houston has a lot of good things going for it. It has a very large refinery, very large chemical base, so it has all the advantages you and I talked about there. Plus, they have a whole lot more activity, construction activity going on in the Houston area in those chemical refinery markets than we do here in Louisiana. The unfortunate changes that were made in the ITEP, in my opinion, that were made back in 2016, has caused a lot of that construction activity to shift to Southeast Texas, and so Houston has benefited that. Now, Houston is taking a lick with these low oil prices. To give you a little bit of an example of how harsh this stuff is, Rystad, I think I've mentioned Rystad before in talks over in your group, is a very famous oil energy forecasting firm out of Norway, I believe it is. They estimate that if the price of oil stays at $20 a barrel, 140 oil and gas extraction firms in the United States will go bankrupt. At $40 a barrel, they think about 70 firms in the United States will go bankrupt. Well, a lot of those firms are headquartered in Houston. Some of them actually are headquartered here. We're talking about the smaller ones, but a lot of them in Houston. So Houston has got some issues associated with that. But Houston is a very diversified economy. They do have a very big healthcare sector, the big cancer center there, the huge healthcare sector. They have a lot of good things going for them, but the energy sector is going to be a bit of a drag. I'm not sure about, there's 2 things on the casino side to concern ourselves with. One is how soon are they going to be open? I would hope by the end of June they would be open. But for them to be open, we also had to have a large number of people who are comfortable being around 5,000 of their favorite people in one place. And that's going to be, that's a problem not only for casinos, that's a problem for movie theaters, that's a problem for LSU athletics. That's just a problem. Restaurants, that's just a problem in general. My hope is that in July or August, we're all going to look back on this spring and say, you know, that was weird, but it was a one-time weird thing. We're cool. We're fine. We're ready to get back to normal. And remember, normal was very good before the coronavirus hit. I think that's a very important thing to remember.
Well, that's a good way to end it up, Dr. Scott. We appreciate it. One of the questions was, would your slides and information be available? We are recording this webinar, and we'll send a link to everyone, and they'll have the information there. So we will send that out.
I will be glad to send the slides to you, George, and then you can distribute them as you wish.
All right. We appreciate it very much. Again, thank you, Dr. Scott, for your time and for your insight. We want to especially thank Phil Earhart and the folks at Iberia Bank for making this webinar possible. And we hope all of you have a good day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.